Hi, I'm your host, Lew Sitzer, welcoming you to NCTV Interviews, and today we have quite a special program. We're exploring local authors, but also local history, and today we're introducing Lily Nova, who collected stories about the prisoners of war in the Philippines Asian theater during World War II. We're also going to be having Margaret Sams, who is an author in her own right, who was also a prisoner during that time, and we'll talk about her experiences. And Jim Mao, many of you who know Jim from the local business that he operates, quite a name in the community, a historic name, whose parents and family were involved as prisoners of war also. So to begin with, let me introduce Lily, who I've gotten to know as a person who's come into the studio to learn Final Cut Pro editing so that she could edit her own work. And in our conversations, I discovered that Lily had written a book called
Interrupted Lives.
and Interrupted Lives is about 4 women. And I'll let, at this point, Lily take over and tell us a little bit about the book and how you got started.
Well, my mother was interested in writing her memoirs, and she was busy at that, and I got the idea of learning about other women who had participated in different activities in World War II. And because I felt very strongly that women's stories could easily disappear with age and attrition, and people wouldn't even remember what had happened at that time. So I wanted to try to interview I knew a number of women myself that I could interview, and then as I went along, I found many others to interview. And I began to see that that I knew 4 people who had, 4 women who were in the same Japanese internment camp in the Philippines. And when I came across, as I was collecting information, I came across Margaret Sams' book. And I was so happy to find that she lived right near me here in Grass Valley. And she lives in Chicago Park. So I was intent on trying to interview her, and I interviewed a school chum from college who hadn't told me much about her experiences, but she had been actually in the same internment camp in Santo Tomas in the Philippines, right in Manila. And then a friend of hers had some fascinating stories from her time also in the same camp. And then my mother knew a woman who was also in the Philippines in an internment camp. And so I put those stories together. I had other stories of women in the other war theaters, and
maybe we could bring Lily's book up now so you could actually see what it looks like. It is available online. It's probably available in the library, local libraries as well, detailing the lives of 4 women quite accurately and dramatically, right?
Yeah.
They don't have it ready yet.
Okay, well, we'll come back to it later.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I was very interested in Margaret Sams' story, and in your book, Margaret, the experiences that you had were so dramatic and very touching, very powerful, and many difficult experiences. And so I wanted to have you talk a little about them, if you don't mind. I know you were just shy of 25 when the war started, and you suddenly found yourself in the internment camp.
Right.
Well, and you had a 4-year-old child.
3.
3-year-old child.
He was, well, I had gone to Manila to see whether or not my son, who was 3 years old, whether we should go home or not, because I thought things were coming to a head and something was going to happen. And I got down to Manila and they said, oh, Manila is the most, I've forgotten that first word already.
How about safe? They said it was safe.
Yes. And they said it was the safest place in the Orient. So I went back and I told my husband, and everything was safe, and for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, something like that. And we were routed out of bed in the middle of the night. You're to be ready to get out of here by 6 o'clock, and you can take one little suitcase apiece. So we took 3 suitcases and went to Manila. And I hadn't expected to stay in Manila, to get to Manila that day, because it was a 2-day or 3-day trip ordinarily, but we did. And very shortly then, we saw the Japanese come riding in on bicycles, and that just absolutely blew my mind. How can you go to war with bicycles against us, is the way I felt. And they did. And I stayed there 3 years and 2 months.
3 years and 2 months, and that was at all in a prisoner of war camp?
Yes, first in Santa Tomas and then in Los Baños.
What were the conditions like?
Well, in Santa Tomas, we were, they had rounded up people from everywhere that were Americans and so on. And they did nothing for us, nothing, and put us in Santa Tomas University, which was a big university. And for my first 3 months, I slept on the hard cement cold with my child.
No mattress, no cover.
No, but a nice lady loaned me a quilt to put under me. I rather have it under me than over me. And by that time, well, New Year's Eve, my husband left with all of the men, and I never saw him again. And time went on, and things began to get better, because we are a people who want to do the right thing. And eventually, children and mothers were in one building, outbuilding, and people who had teenagers were another place, and people who were my age were in another place.
And the men were in a separate building.
The men were in a separate
There was
building.
3,000 people altogether. So.
Mm-hmm. In the main building, they had all kinds, from teenagers to my age, more or less. And the first 6 months, we really lived on a boatload of wheat that was in the harbor. And there was a Red Cross man there, and he persuaded them to give that boatload of wheat to us, and it lasted for 6 months. And then other things came along, and all kinds of ways, all kinds of. I was one of the ones who had no packages coming over the line. If people lived in Manila and would have had servants, and they would have, so they were brought food. I tried not to go near the line when food was coming over.
You had a little one to take care of.
I had my 3-year-old to take care of. And those children, there was a lot of crying at first, just lots of crying with children. But gradually they had people that they knew by that time, and they could play. And of course, we made a school so that they should go to school.
So the people in the
And
camp,
we ourselves did everything.
you had, the Japanese didn't bring food in.
They didn't do anything.
You had a kind of a council and people who were in charge of each area of need, like
Right.
cleanup and
Yes,
food.
everybody must work 2 hours a day for the camp. And whatever your job was, you went to it. And there were dozens of people, the things that were to be done, from dishes to hair cutting to hair washing to school to libraries, and
Somebody had to clean the bathrooms.
somebody had to clean the bathrooms.
It was
And you were allowed 3 pieces of paper when you went to the bathroom,
right. You
and it had to be said.
What was your most difficult experience, if I might ask?
You really want to know? Well, I don't know whether I want to say it.
Well,
Well,
That's all
anyway, I
right.
will. Let's see, it had been, it was in September on the 13th of the first year that I had walked out to the front area where they played games of kinds, many kinds. And while I was standing there, a man walked up next to me, and I had paid no attention at all. And he said to me, "What's the score?" And I said, "Right over there." I didn't say anything, I just pointed because it was on the. Well, he's teased me about that forever because I didn't say a word to him. And anyway, eventually we became very good friends, and then we loved each other. And that was I can't even begin to tell you how that was. You'd have to read my book.
And that's a good segue to talk about Margaret's book. Perhaps we can show it on screen. It's called Forbidden Family, and it's Margaret's story. So I invite you. Is it in our local library?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So I invite you to our local library. I'm sure you can get it online as well. So during the show, we'll flash the book on the screen. Here it is now. You want to mention anything else about the book, Margaret?
Well, it took me a long, long time to do it, to write it. In the first place, I didn't even think about writing a book for years, but gradually I needed to get out of me all the things that I had gone through, and having the baby and the notoriety in the camp and so on. And when Jerry's and we had 3 children, have 3 children. David, our first one who went through the internment, he died in the year 2000. And they never had children. But anyway, where was I? I was going
Just
to...
how difficult it was to write the book and how long it took you to do it.
Yes, it took me forever because I've read books all my life. That's been my life, was to read books. But it was hard to say it all. And when our first child, Jerry's and mine, no, second child, it was the first time I'd had any time to be alone. And I thought, this is it. I will take him to school, and I will take the typewriter, and I will write. And I did.
You sat in the back seat
I
with
sat
the
in
typewriter on
seat.
your lap.
That's what I did.
And typed out this book.
Yes, and it took me a long, long time. And I didn't finish it for years until we had our last child. And
then you put it in your drawer.
And then I put it
Nobody
away,
saw it.
and I didn't even think about trying. It soothed me. I got rid of a lot of venom and so on.
Well, I have to interrupt at this point and
Yes,
go on to Jim. There's
Yes,
a lot
Jim.
more to the story. I encourage people to read the book. Hopefully we'll have more chance to explore it. But want to talk about Jim's family, the experiences that you grew up hearing about. Tell us where to begin.
Oh, well, a very, very long story short, my dad started out the book working in the Idaho-Maryland mine here locally. He and my mother got married in Sutter Creek, moved to Grass Valley. He worked in the mines. He was a gold miner, or a hard rock miner. And then he, some of his friends went to the Philippine Islands, got good jobs over there. He decided that was for him. He decided he was going to go to the Philippine Islands, work there, which he did. He went and got a job. My mother came over with their 2 children. My oldest sister was a baby. Worked there, and then the war broke out, of course. The same day that Pearl Harbor was bombed, the Philippines were bombed, and it was almost immediate that, the Japanese started occupying the Philippine Islands. So within 10 days after that, they had to make the decision, stay and go into an internment camp, which may have been the best thing, as my dad points out several times in this book. Maybe I should have. They didn't. They went up in the hills, hid out for 15 months before they were captured after they got malaria. At which point my dad got polio at the same time, was paralyzed on one side of his body, and was told he'd probably never walk again. And just the struggles, the book tells about the struggles that they had. Oh my, I'm getting emotional. The struggles they had, not only hiding out from the Japanese for the first year, almost a year, it wasn't too bad, but then the Japanese decided to clean up all the guerrillas, and he had joined the guerrilla movement up there. And
They weren't sure whether he was a military personnel or what.
yeah, he wanted to be a military personnel until he realized capture was imminent, and then all of a sudden he wanted to be a civilian because they got treated much nicer than the military. So fortunately, they're very sick. My mother went out and actually hid his guns and his papers just the day before they were captured. And so after 15 months out in the hills, they're in a concentration camp, and they spend nearly 2 years. They were captured in March of 43. Spent most of the time in Baguio, which was, I think, a little better conditions probably than in Manila. But then towards the end, when the Japanese started losing, they moved them back into Manila, and they spent the last, I think it was maybe less than a year, in Bilibid prison, which is a couple miles from Santa Tomas in Manila, and were liberated out of Bilibid prison in 1945, February. So that's the
long
short
and
version
long
of
and
the
short of it.
short version of the long. Same thing with like Margaret. My dad just had to get the story out. He'd always kept diaries. He always loved to write, and you know, he came back from the Philippines, could no longer work as a hard rock miner, having had polio and his one leg never did come back. So he, you know, was a painter. He painted barns. He did whatever he could for a living. And I think as Margaret and my parents and many people of that generation, Tom Brokaw wrote a book called America's Greatest Generation,
Right.
or America's Great Generation, and they were all ordinary people that had to go through extraordinary times and came out of it, made this country stronger. So I think they're all just part of that.
And some of what you don't mention is the fact that your mom had a child, a baby, while in the jungle.
Well, yeah, she was 8 months pregnant when the war broke out. My sister was born actually 1st of February, around the 1st of February, 1942. So she had to walk up quite a ways up into the mountains to the sawmill. And then when they got there, you know, they decided, my dad, second thought, he says, you know, maybe we should have given ourselves up. You know, you're pregnant, you need medical help. There was a doctor that was sort of in the area, but so they walked all the way down to give themselves up because the Japanese said to meet them there at a certain time. The Japanese didn't show up on time to pick them up, so they decided, no, let's go back. So they went back up into the hills. My sister was born at the sawmill. And so they're running from the Japanese with these 3 little kids.
After 3 trips up and down to the sawmill.
Yeah, you know, the first trip up from the mine up into the sawmill, you know, my dad tried to get all these people to help her up, you know, after that she walked everywhere, you know. I mean, she was one tough woman.
I get this feeling about your parents that they were incredible people to not only survive, but to somehow make the best of it, and to continue with their lives in an incredibly generous way towards others, and always including people and supporting people.
Oh, absolutely. It was an interesting house to grow up in with the 12 children that we had, and my dad had a penchant for somebody had come in the store and didn't know where they were staying that night. They ended up at our house, meal, a place to sleep. Yeah, they were very giving people, and just looking back on it, how they raised 12 kids. We all worked in the business, and we all learned the business. all the boys still continue in the paint or glass business that he bought in 1949 and put the name Owl Paint and Glass on it. So it's been quite an experience.
The name of the book is God's Arms Around Us by William Mao, and it's the second volume of a 2-volume series available in the library.
Well, it actually is a standalone book, and my dad actually wrote 3 books.
Okay.
This one, God's Arms Around Us, was published in 1959, so that's quite a while after the war. And the Little Mal history book he wrote after that, but it precedes it. And the 3rd book is about all of us kids growing up, but that one we don't know if we'll ever get published.
Well, I have a feeling it's going to get published. It's just too good a history to lose. The Mao family has been a tradition in the area before me, that's for sure. I mean, your dad came here
1937, they moved into Grass Valley.
Right. So it's a great story, and so I encourage you to read it. Any more questions that we have?
Well, if do we have a little more?
We have a little more time.
Yeah. It seemed like your father and mother had so much faith and so much they were really an inspiration to other people. So much endurance to be able to keep going through those amazing experiences.
Yeah, if you read the book, you realize that he really prayed a lot during this time. And I think he made a lot of promises to God, which he tried to keep after the war. All of us kids went to Catholic school. You know, we all got a Christian education. And just the way he lived his life, I think, was a result of a lot of prayers and a lot of talking back and forth to God during this time. And just, he felt that God did have his arms around him and brought them through this, because could have died many a time. And some of his friends did die, so.
Yeah.
That's our signal that the show's coming to an end, and we really want to thank each of you. Margaret?
Coming to an end.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention the daughter I had in the camp.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you agreed to coming back, we'll continue. We'll continue the story. This is really, we've just touched the surface of it. So I want to thank Margaret and Jim, Lily. Thank you very much for beginning all this. And
Thank you.
please tune in again to NCTV Interviews. We're just happy to have you aboard, and see you again soon. Thanks a lot.